Food is the backbone of civilization, and every society relies on farming. But when it fails, history changes, entire nations collapse, and the results can be catastrophic. Today, we're digging into the worst agricultural crises in history. Disasters that starved millions, reshaped history, and left lessons we're still struggling to learn. Let's dive in. Number 1. The Irish Potato Famine, 1845 to 1852. In 19th century Ireland, potatoes weren't just food, they were survival. Nearly half the population depended almost entirely on them. Then in 1845, a fungal disease called Phytophthora infestans hit. Potatoes turned black and rotted in the ground. And it wasn't just one bad season. The blight returned year after year. But the tragedy wasn't only natural. Ireland was under British rule, and while millions starved, food exports continued to England. Relief was patchy, slow, and often tied to harsh conditions. By the end, over 1 million were dead, and another 1 million forced to emigrate. A crisis of farming became a crisis of politics, empire, and survival. Second on the list is the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. Fast forward to the 1930s in the United States. Farmers across the Great Plains that extended over southeastern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, and northeastern New Mexico had plowed millions of acres for wheat, removing the native grasses that had protected the soil for centuries. When the rain stopped, there was nothing to hold the land in place. Strong winds whipped up storms so massive that they turned day into night, called the Black Blizzards. Crops withered, livestock suffocated, families abandoned their farms. Nearly 3.5 million people migrated, many heading west to California. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a drought, it was man-made, fueled by unsustainable farming and poor land management. Fortunately, the wind erosion was gradually halted with federal aid. Windbreaks known as shelter belts, which were basically swaths of trees that protect soil and crops from wind, were planted, and much of the grassland was restored. By the early 1940s, the area had largely recovered. Number 3. The Bengal Famine, 1943, India. In 1943, Bengal, then under British colonial rule, was struck by famine. A cyclone and flooding destroyed rice crops in October 1942. Then came a fungal disease called brown spot, cutting harvests even further. This put pressure on the following year's crop because, to survive, many subsistence farmers had to consume grain meant for planting. However, the 1943 crop yield was actually sufficient to feed the people of Bengal. But what made it catastrophic was policy. After Burma, now officially known as Myanmar, and Singapore fell to Japan in 1942 in the midst of World War II, rice exports from those countries were halted. The war in Asia meant rice imports from Burma stopped. Fearing Japanese invasion, British authorities diverted food for military needs and stockpiled food to feed defending troops, and they exported considerable quantities to British forces in the Middle East. They also confiscated boats, carts, and elephants in Chittagong, where the invasion was expected. This deprived fishermen and their customers of the ability to operate and generally inhibited the sort of low-level commerce upon which many Bengalis relied for survival. In the wake of these actions by the British, traders hoarded grain, driving up prices. Relief was mismanaged and in some areas blocked entirely. The result? Over 3 million deaths, which was more than 6 times the British Empire's casualties in World War II, raging at the same time. The Bengal famine stands as one of the most tragic examples of how nature and politics together can turn food scarcity into mass death. Number 4. The Great Chinese Famine, 1959 to 1961. This famine was the deadliest of all. During Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, China pushed for rapid industrialization and farming reforms. Between 1958 and early 1960, the Chinese Communist Party organized China's vast population into communes. The Chinese hoped to develop labor-intensive methods of industrialization, which would emphasize manpower rather than machines and capital expenditure. Thereby, it was hoped the country could bypass the slow, more typical process of industrialization through gradual accumulation of capital and purchase of heavy machinery. The promulgation of the Great Leap Forward was the result of the failure of the Soviet model of industrialization in China. The Soviet model, which emphasized the conversion of capital gained from the sale of agricultural products into heavy machinery, was inapplicable in China because, unlike the Soviet Union, China had a very dense population and no large agricultural surplus with which to accumulate capital. After intense debate, it was decided that agriculture and industry could be developed at the same time by changing people's working habits and relying on labor rather than machine-centered industrial processes. An experimental commune was established in the north-central province of Hunan early in 1958, and the system soon spread throughout the country. The Great Leap Forward approach was epitomized by the development of small backyard steel furnaces in every village and urban neighborhood, which were intended to accelerate the industrialization process. Large-scale rural communes were forced to meet impossible grain quotas. Local officials exaggerated harvest numbers to please the state. The result? The government took more grain than farmers could spare, leaving villages with nothing. Meanwhile, bad weather and locust outbreaks added to the misery. Starvation spread across provinces. The death toll is staggering. Estimates range from 20 million to over 45 million between 1959 and 1962. The Great Chinese Famine wasn't just natural failure, it was political denial, policy gone wrong, and the silencing of truth. Number 5. The Sahel Droughts, 1968 to 1972. Sahel, a semi-arid region of western and north-central Africa, extends from Senegal eastward to Sudan. It forms a transitional zone between the arid Sahara Desert to the north and the belt of humid savannas to the south. The Sahel stretches from the Atlantic Ocean eastward through northern Senegal, southern Mauritania, the Great Bend of the Niger River in Mali, Burkina Faso, formerly Upper Volta, southern Niger, northeastern Nigeria, south-central Chad, and into Sudan. In the late 1960s, a long drought hit the Sahel region, but humans made it worse. Colonial-era farming pushed cash crops over local food staples. Overgrazing stripped the land bare. As the rains failed, desertification advanced. The Sahel was increasingly afflicted by soil erosion and desertification resulting from growing human populations that made more demands upon the land than previously. Town dwellers and farmers stripped the tree and scrub cover to obtain firewood and grow crops, after which excessive numbers of livestock devoured the remaining grass cover. Rainfall runoff and the wind then carried off the fertile topsoils, leaving arid and barren wastelands. Rainfall dropped by as much as 50%. Pastures dried, livestock died by the millions, and crops failed year after year. By the early 1970s, millions were displaced and hundreds of thousands perished. The drought led to the virtual extinction of the crops and the loss of approximately 50 to 70% of the cattle. In 1972, there was practically no rain at all, and by 1973, sections of the Sahara had advanced southward up to 60 miles, close to 100 kilometers. The loss of human life by starvation and disease was estimated at 100,000. The Sahel crisis forced the world to ask the pertinent question: are we watching climate change and human mismanagement create deserts where farmland once thrived? Number 6. Ethiopian Famine, 1983 to 1985. 40 years ago, at the end of November 1984, there was one disaster above all galvanizing the world's attention: the famine in Ethiopia, which was eventually to kill up to 1 million people. Ethiopia's 1980s famine was a perfect storm of drought, war, and politics. Drought devastated harvests, but civil conflict and forced resettlement policies blocked aid and disrupted farming. The government downplayed the disaster, and food distribution often favored politically loyal regions. Thousands were dying every week. The impact of drought was compounded by the Marxist regime being in denial about the famine severity and by the region being caught up in civil war. An aid official described the famine as hell on earth. It didn't seem an exaggeration. Thanks to the BBC team that finally managed to get access to the epicenter of the famine late in the October 1984, the images of skeletal children shocked the world, sparking aid concerts like Live Aid. Billions in aid flowed in, but the famine exposed how deeply politics and conflict can entangle with hunger. Number 7. Global Food Price Crisis, 2007 to 2008. In 2007 and 2008, the world faced a food crisis unlike the old famines. It wasn't about empty fields, it was about skyrocketing prices. Droughts in Australia cut wheat production. Oil prices spiked, raising transport and fertilizer costs. The US diverted corn into biofuel. Global grain reserves were at their lowest in 30 years. The result: staple prices doubled or tripled. Families in poorer nations simply couldn't afford food. The rising food prices created a global crisis and caused political and economic instability and social unrest in both poor and developed nations. Riots broke out in over 30 countries, from Haiti to Egypt. It proved that in our globalized world, hunger can be caused as much by economics as by nature. Number 8. Mad cow disease in 1980s and 1990s. In the 1980s and 90s, Britain faced a different kind of agricultural crisis, not famine but food safety. Farmers were feeding cattle with protein supplements made from animal remains. This practice spread bovine spongiform encephalopathy, better known as mad cow disease. First recognized in cattle in the United Kingdom in 1986, BSE became epidemic there, particularly in southern England. Cases also were reported in other parts of Europe and in Canada. It is thought to have arisen when cattle were fed high-protein supplements made from ruminant carcasses and offal, the trimmings of butchered animals. Although animal remains had been used as a source of dietary supplements for several decades without problems, modifications to the rendering process, specifically reduction in the temperatures used and discontinuance of certain solvents, in the early 1980s were followed by the outbreak of BSE. The disease could even jump to humans, causing a fatal brain condition. Millions of cattle were slaughtered, beef exports collapsed, and consumer trust evaporated. It showed how shortcuts in farming, designed for profit, can backfire disastrously. Number 9. Recurring locust plagues in Africa and Asia. Locust plagues sound biblical, but they're painfully real. When rains are heavy, desert locusts breed explosively, forming swarms that move in the billions. In 2020, parts of Africa and elsewhere experienced unusually heavy rains. Locusts like to breed in moist conditions. The locusts multiplied and caused devastation in parts of Africa, in Asia, and in the Middle East. I want you to imagine what these locust swarms looked like. At the time, one swarm was recorded as having up to 200 billion of these creatures. It occupied a space in the sky that was 3 times the space that would be over a place like New York City. They caused serious damage and could move really quickly. They can move up to 150 kilometers in just one day. To understand the damage these desert locusts caused, a single swarm can eat the same amount of food in a day as millions of people. So that gives you an idea of how bad this problem was at the time. In 2020, East Africa saw the worst outbreak in 70 years. Farmers watched their fields stripped bare in hours. Modern pesticides help, but once swarms form, control is almost impossible. It's a reminder that some agricultural threats remain as old as civilization itself. Lastly, at number 10 is COVID-19 food supply disruptions in 2020. Unlike past famines, this disaster wasn't about poor harvests, it was about broken supply chains. With borders closed and workers stranded, farmers couldn't move their goods. Milk was poured down drains, fruit rotted in orchards, while in cities, shelves went empty and millions faced hunger. It was a chilling reminder that our global food system is fragile. A virus didn't just threaten our health. It shook the foundation of how food moves from farm to table. Those have been the top 10 farming and agricultural crises of all time. From blight to dust storms, from famine to food price riots. Every crisis shows the same truth. Farming is never just about food. It's about politics, economics, the environment, and choices we make. And when those choices fail, the consequences echo for generations. The question is, have we learned enough, or is the next great agricultural crisis already unfolding? What do you think is today's greatest farming threat? Share your comment below. Thanks for watching. If you found this eye-opening, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more deep dives into farming, food, and the future.